Let's take a look at early outfield rankings up next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5 on Thursday, November 14th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Chris Towers, and let's take a look at Chris's way too early outfield rankings. Only the top 12 here. If you want to hear more, then check out the full-length podcast. But your top 3 outfielders for next season, Chris: Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Mookie Betts. They have the track record. They're all going to be first-round picks regardless of format. Seems pretty standard here.
Yeah, this was the one trio when we were talking with Scott White on the full episode of the podcast. There's no disagreements on which 3 go here, what the order will be. Now, I will say, in the drafts that are happening right now, and it's November, and players tend to be discounted when they are free agents, which doesn't often make sense. I think especially doesn't make sense with a guy like Juan Soto. His value is not really going to change. But I have seen Juan Soto go behind a couple of other outfielders besides Aaron Judge. His ADP early on is the number 2 outfielder, but you took Kyle Tucker ahead of him in one of your drafts. I saw Mookie Betts go ahead of him in one of mine. So I think there is less consensus here, or at least in the industry, than there is on this podcast. But I think you agree all 3 of these guys, track record, production. If you wanted to take Mookie ahead of Juan Soto, okay, I guess you can justify it, but I don't really see it. I actually think the 4 category studs like Juan Soto are arguably undervalued in fantasy at this point in Roto, because stolen bases are easier to come by than ever. Batting average, harder to come by than ever.
4 through 6 in your outfield rankings, you have Kyle Tucker, Yordan Alvarez, and Fernando Tatis. And we know with Tucker and Tatis this past season, 2 what seemed like pretty fluky injuries. It was the shin for Tucker. It was upper leg stress reaction for Fernando Tatis. So obviously we're hoping those things don't linger, but when they played, still lots of power and speed from both.
Yeah, I think Fernando Tatis is the one that people might look side-eyed at and say, he's missed so much time with injury. How can you rank him this high? I don't really view him as that big of an injury risk heading into 2025. And maybe that's me being a little too thoughtless about how I'm approaching injuries. But you look at the way Fernando Tatis' career has gone, and it was early on in his career, it was that shoulder being the recurring thing. And then he had the fractured wrist when he had the motorcycle accident. Cost him all of the 2022 season, comes back from a suspension in 2023, plays all of 2023, and then has this stress reaction in 2024. That's a new injury. It hasn't been a recurring one so far. It wasn't an issue before last year. I'm as inclined to write that off as I am with Kyle Tucker's fractured shin. I don't really think either of them carries that much elevated injury risk. Among these 6, Yordan Alvarez is probably the biggest injury risk because he's had his own recurring knee issues, including a flare-up last year at one point. But again, true 4 category stud. I think if he hits 45 homers and hits 320 next year, I wouldn't really be surprised by either number. And so if I'm going to miss out on stolen bases, I'm going to do it with a guy that can be a legitimate difference maker at the other 4 categories.
7 through 9 in your outfield rankings, you have Corbin Carroll, Julio Rodriguez, and Ronald Acuña. We know with the first 2 letdown seasons, Corbin Carroll almost got all the way back to what we needed from him with a huge second half. Julio, he had the big September, but obviously needed more than that. And Acuña now coming back from a second torn ACL, different knee this time, but they already said he's not going to be ready for opening day. Chris, how did you land on putting Acuña 9th here in your outfield rankings?
It's just kind of the middle of 2 tiers. And I think there's a big tier drop off after Julio Rodriguez and Corbin Carroll. So I might as well just slot Ronald Acuña there. And look, I'll fully admit with 5.5 months until opening day, this may be too high. This may be way too high for Ronald Acuña. If he's not ready until May, it's going to be a problem. But we're so far out that even the, Alex Anthopoulos saying we don't think he's going to be ready for opening day, I take it with a grain of salt for now. I haven't had the opportunity to draft him in either of the 2 leagues that I've done. He was never my top player in either one when I drafted. If I'm on the clock between now and March and he's my top player available in like the end of the first round, early second round, I might reconsider it. But for now, with no stakes, I will stick with Ronald Acuña and the upside that he brings to the table.
And 10 through 12 in your outfield rankings, you have Jarren Duran, Jackson Chourio, and Jazz Chisholm. If you want to hear more about those players, then you can do so on our full-length podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, and we will be back again on Saturday. Bye-bye.